Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast here from your friends at Radio 2, where there are an awful lot of sins being committed by the listeners on a fairly regular basis, which provides the core of this feature. This week's concise collection features bulging blackout blunders, maverick movie maelstroms, teenage tartan tantrums, and dastardly dragon deceptions. Here it all comes. So it's another drive time confession, and the music is running, and Deadly is here, and Rebecca remembers how it goes, I think.
I do, yes.
Vaguely. Yeah, vaguely.
And you're fresh from the Pope, aren't you? You just come from the Vatican.
I missed the Pope. We got back here the day before.
Did you miss
it was
the
a bit
double
crowded.
sainting?
I missed it, yes.
Missed the double sainting?
Sadly.
Matt was watching it live.
Yeah. Can't
following
get
it
enough.
through. Anyway, so here's tonight's tale. It comes from Belinda. Thank you, Belinda. Dear Monsignor Mayo and the thankfully forgiving few. It's a confession a few weeks ago that you had, featuring a girl stuck in her too small wetsuit, reminded me of something that happened to me in the mid-90s. And since hearing that confession, I felt the need to seek forgiveness for my own deed, and I find myself writing to you guys. In those mid-1990s, I was enjoying what I fondly call my fat 40s, living in a town on the west coast of Ireland, which enjoyed regular short power cuts. My husband at the time had referred to me as, and I quote, fat, frumpy and 40.
Nice.
But I am.
Another catch.
We come back to...
I'll bet he figures later on, yeah.
We come back to
I'm sure
him.
he comes back, yeah.
But I felt because I was tall, I could carry it off and simply bought a new wardrobe every time I went up a clothes size.
And the clothes.
Thank you. As with most towns in Ireland, there was a general all-purpose fashion store which would have started out as a humble haberdasher's once upon a time. This particular store had evolved quite a lot, and on the first floor it housed a lot of the big fashion brands that would be found in large department stores, and it was here I did all my clothes shopping. Getting close to Christmas, I had purchased an occasion dress, which frankly made me look fat, frumpy and 40. It was time to do something about this. Late one Saturday afternoon, I visited my favourite store and upstairs found a selection of shapewear, which, for those who don't know, were elasticised lycra girdle-type contraptions promising to deliver the perfect figure. Do you know about this? Shapewear? Have you heard of this?
Might do.
Have you?
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You've just read about it.
No.
Okay.
You wear
Anyway, these
Not
were...
always.
I was just asking whether
For occasions, perhaps.
You're going to get a smack round the chops. Yeah. These were essential to me while I enjoyed my fat 40s, says Belinda.
Oh, yeah.
With the help of a sales assistant, I armed myself with a selection of the magical garments and headed for the small changing cubicle in the corner of the first floor. Just as I'd managed to roll an incredibly tight flesh-coloured piece of lycra up my body from just above my knees, past my waist, all the way up to the built-in padded bra, all the lights went out in the first floor of the shop. And as I found out later, the entire street was in darkness. This is one of those power cuts that they had in Ireland that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It was around this time I realised I was stuck. I couldn't get the piece of underwear to move. I was unable to persuade it even to think about rolling down, and the more I panicked, the hotter and sweatier I became. There was nothing else for it. I had to ask for the help of the helpful sales assistant and meekly called for her to help me from behind the curtain. It's not a problem, she said, with what I imagined through the blackness was a sympathetic smile. We'll soon have you out of that. As I remember, the original version of this had stage directions for me to do an Irish accent, which seems to be removed.
Really?
No, I'm not.
Come on.
We don't do that kind of thing. Anyway, says the woman, we'll soon have you out of that.
Compliance.
After several minutes of trying, it was quite obvious the complete absence of light and the bijou nature of the dressing room were adversely affecting our progress to free me from this girdle-style undergarment. By now, I was also secretly wondering if the blackout had caused it to somehow fuse with my DNA, leaving me with magic lycra skin. Anyway, my superhero delusions were happily interrupted by the sales assistant telling me that there were no customers in the shop and that I should come out onto the floor where the emergency lights were on.
No way.
Realising that this was the only way I was going to be released from this tight item of torture, I followed her out onto the dimly lit floor.
This way.
Once she got the technique right, it only took one deft motion on her part to drag the offending article down my body, over my knees to my ankles, and with a sigh of relief, I stepped out of my prison. I was free! At that moment, two things happened pretty much at the same time.
The lights.
First, there was an almighty crash as the shop manager barged through the double doors, and then the main lights came on. We stood in silence. Manager, open-mouthed, beginning to wonder if he'd left the stockroom and stepped into a parallel universe. Me, naked, obviously. And the helpful sales assistant slowly lowering some underwear that she'd been victoriously holding aloft, waving like a flag. Now, this may only have been 5 seconds in duration, but in my head, it lasted for hours. So I've been thinking about this. I don't think I asked forgiveness of the sales assistant who got an eyeful of my now sweaty, frumpy 40 body when the item of underwear had been removed. I think she pretty much knew this was always going to be a risk. But I do ask forgiveness from the shop manager, who, after the event, turned, as if in slow motion, and silently left the floor, deathly white and shaking, apparently never to return again. I did lose the weight over the next decade, and I never sought the help of the magic shapewear ever again. And perhaps, unsurprisingly, I am no longer married to the husband who referred to me as fat, frumpy and 40. So I think, all right, probably did yourself a favour there. Anyway, a shocking story involving garments that I didn't know existed. Anyway, it's a story of shapewear on the west coast of Ireland in the 1990s, power cuts and fleshy tights and things like that.
Did you really not know that stuff existed?
Shapewear?
Yeah, really?
No, I didn't know that.
I'm surprised by that. I really am.
I reckon there's probably a lot of guys going, who knew?
Never heard of it.
Seriously?
No.
But I mean,
Well, I
I
was
would have
told
thought
I'd be
that most
slapped if I
women,
asked.
right? Yeah, I'm getting a nod from my producer. Most women know all about that.
Well, maybe
I'm just
women
surprised they don't
I
talk about it
think
with
this is-
their men folk.
Guess what, guys? I've got my shapewear on today. It's not really what you
I
discussed,
know,
is
but
it?
they might discover it. Anyway, I think the problem was... I'm actually surprised that the manager never returned again. Is that really true?
I'm just
that
saying
he
it's-
was so traumatised
Yeah.
by seeing this woman. Anyway, I think that it was the sales assistant's fault because she suggested that the woman come out of the little cubicle and
Well,
take
at the
her clothes
time,
off
it
in the
looked
middle
like
of the shop
but
floor.
It was, it was all dark.
I know, but they should have just waited until, I don't know...
the fire brigade.
Called the fire brigade or something more practical. I'm sure the manager's seen worse than that, and I think he was just being pathetic, really, by never returning again. And it all turned out well when she ditched the husband who called her fat and frumpy.
I'm sure there was a Dad's
40.
Army episode where a character referred to fleshings. Is this the same thing, Deadly?
It's just the way you did it. It's
Anyway, I'm forgiving Belinda. I'm forgiving you.
Okay. Shapewear then, Deadly, what do you think?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm going to get some. I blame the assistant as well. I've got here. What else? What else was it to do?
Are you just copying?
Yeah. I'd just cover up your work, your markings. But yes, and also the manager. No need to apologise to him. He was very discreet. He snuck out, and there was no problem.
Yeah,
As
he
you
was
say, he must have
shaking.
seen worse than that. Yeah, but I don't know why he was shaking particularly. But that's his problem, not mine. I forgive.
Well, let's see what Brother Matthew's made of all that.
I'm unfamiliar with this shapewear. I'm a little bit surprised that you're able to try it on, though, because I would have thought I
pants
don't
on,
think.
can you?
Yeah, exactly. You can't. But also, it was the assistant's idea. But it was she went along with it. She was more than happy to go out onto the. We all knew what was going to happen. As soon as the assistant says, "Do you fancy coming out of the cubicle and going right into the shop floor?" We all knew as soon as that comes down, those lights are going on. So it was her own fault, Belinda. Much as we all sympathise with you, and we're glad that you ditched the bloke.
husband.
Yeah, absolutely, good call there. But here you're not being forgiven.
Here we go with tonight's confession, which comes from...
Go on.
Just make it up.
Leslie.
Leslie.
Leslie being a boy and a man.
Right. Okay. Long story, is it?
Dear Father Simon and the Collective, this confession has been brought on by the recent family confession of a father claiming to have punched a shark,
Oh yeah, brilliant.
and similarly involved the use of a little great white lie to my young son to allow me to get my own way. If I may, I'd like to set the scene, not that I'm making excuses or anything. It's the early 90s, and my favourite film, since seeing it at the cinema many years before, is Top Gun. It's being shown on the TV. Now, just to be clear, it's the early 90s, before the days of everything being available on demand at the click of a finger. Most people still used phone boxes. This was a big deal. My wife, Sandra, for some unfathomable reason, was not as big of a fan of this particular film as me. So watching it live was ruled out. Instead, she insisted that I record Top Gun using our new video recorder so as not to hog the TV all night with that, quote, far-fetched boys' rubbish. By which he probably meant action-packed, yet emotionally sensitive, era-defining, career-making, super mega-hit movie. I think that's what she meant, but I can't be sure. Upon recording the film, I used the age-old technique of snapping the tab on the video to prevent it being recorded over. Remember this?
Yeah.
This is what
Yes,
you do with the
yes.
essential videos that you want to keep.
Oh, yes.
Again, I don't want to detract from my guilt here, but I do deserve a pat on the back. Because back then, you may remember, we were awash with stories of how grown men were reduced to tears when they sat down to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, only to find a couple of minutes in that the picture disappeared to a grey fuzz, slowly reappearing as something useless like your wedding video or something like that. You'll remember the terror followed by a moment of hope that was a momentary glitch. Anyway, almost always dashed. So here we go then. Being a loving husband, which I was, and a doting father to our two children, which I was, I recorded Top Gun and accepted that I would watch it at a later date, maybe even never. That was okay with me as long as my family were happy. They came first. However, as it turned out, this moment arrived sooner than expected. Now here comes my favourite gender-specific line in any confession ever.
Okay, cool.
Turns out that my wife was called into our daughter's ballet class one Saturday morning to help sew on some sequins. I was left to watch over our son, 8 years old. Things went well. We did all the things that dads should do with their sons. Needless to say, extravagant Lego construction was done. And then I had a eureka moment. What better way to bond than to watch a film together? My son looked a little bit unimpressed. It's about planes. Anyway, didn't seem to be that impressed with this. He was not convinced I had enough enthusiasm for both of us. Sadly, as the film progressed, he looked less and less interested. He may even have asked if he could go and read.
Oh, wow.
This was interrupting my enjoyment of the film. Eventually, he looked up at me and uttered the words I had been dreading. Can we watch something else, Daddy? I looked at my watch. We still had hours to fill. All those sequins needed. Yes. Would there ever be a better opportunity? I felt the need to lie to my son. Hang on, I said. This is the bit that was based on your granddad.
Oh, no!
Well, he bristled with excitement. His eyes sparkled. He sat transfixed for the rest of the movie as Grandad, overcame the odds to become an unlikely American hero. As with so many opportunistic fibs, I thought this would be the end of it, especially since it was such a teeny-weeny microscopic one. However, as the weeks went on, we ended up, to my wife's annoyance, watching Grandad's film again and again and again and again. In my defence, Grandad was in the RAF in the 40s. If you read the small print, you'd know that he was based at Cottesmore in Rutland and was a fuel tanker driver. Now, this minor detail was never mentioned to my son, who happily went on with his increased admiration for his granddad. Well, Grandad seemed to enjoy the fact that my son took such an interest in his RAF days. So much so that my son wrote a short story on Grandad Maverick. I helped with the title. This story was so inspiring that Grandad was asked into school by my son's ex-military head teacher for a special assembly.
Yes.
How about that? Well, so here we go. I don't seek forgiveness from any of my family for years of watching Top Gun on repeat. I deserve a reward for that. I do seek forgiveness from Grandad, who relished being the subject of such a prestigious event at my son's school under mostly false pretences. And I ask forgiveness from the teachers who, when expecting stories of dogfights and spitfires, were given stories of fueling errors and spillages. I played this down by explaining that he didn't really want to talk about it. Anyway, I beg forgiveness from the head teacher, who from that day on would salute Grandad whenever he collected my son from school. Well, it's a tiny little fib from selfish Leslie, but it turned out into a big old whopper. Let's see what the
I thought it was an
is.
ingenious solution to a seemingly intractable problem. I mean, the thing about having hours to fill and then coming up with that, it was just brilliant,
It's
inspired.
Grandad Maverick.
It was a little white lie because it's true that Grandad did work for the RAF.
Yes.
Not as a pilot, but there you go. Grandad loved it, the son loved it, and the teacher didn't mind. So I don't think there's anything to forgive. You're forgiven, Leslie.
Yeah.
It takes my breath away. Anyway.
Oh, very good.
Sing it,
Very
please.
good.
No, I don't think so. He's
Yes.
deadly then.
Forgiven. Grandad's RAF achievements were recognised after all. Not a bad thing. Forget the detail.
And that's it?
Forget the detail.
Excellent.
I think so, yeah,
I
forgiven.
think that's the way... I think people are going to like this anyway. You never know.
And now here's a rant.
Yes, when an 8-year-old tells you I'd rather read than watch a movie, so there's a movie critic for you. I think Grandad should have gone along with this a bit more. I don't know, why is Grandad talking about this, the fuel driving, when really he should have been talking about how he was buzzing jets off
you want him to fib as
carriers, that kind of... That's what you want. I remember Kelly McGuinness, he should have been saying. So I'm going to say forgiven,
yes!
but I'm not forgiving the Grandad who should have gone away with it far more.
Is that what you think?
Yes.
Sandra in Suffolk has sent in tonight's tale. Thank you, Sandra. Dear Father Simon, my confession goes back to my teenage years in the 1970s. 1976 to be precise, the Bay City Rollers were high in the charts. I was a very young 14-year-old with the bedroom of a typical teenager. My walls were adorned with posters of the Bay City Rollers, David Essex, the Bay City Rollers, David Cassidy, the Bay City Rollers. As you can tell, the Bay City Rollers were my fave. All my friends at school... This is before your time, Rebecca, I think, isn't it?
My sister was into David Cassidy, and she used to sing that BAY song the whole time. That one? No, you don't know that one?
Don't know.
No.
I wasn't really into any of it at the time. All our friends at school were also big fans, and we all tried our best to get some tartan to put on our clothes. Even the tiniest scrap was treated like gold. Coming from a humble home, tartan was hard to come by. In stark contrast to my own stricken situation, my best friend, Claudette, had not only a pair of jeans with tartan stripes down the side, but also a jacket with an enormous tartan patch on the back. Imagine that. I begged my mum and dad for some money to buy some tartan material to put on my clothes, just a teeny tiny square to put on the pocket of my jeans, or some offcuts to wear as a bow in my hair. Anything would do. But to no avail. After a few unsuccessful weeks of trying to wear my parents down, they were still stubbornly claiming that putting food on the table was more important than buying me tartan. The fools. Then, a twist of fate. One evening my dad came home with a new work coat, supplied by his firm for the coming winter. As he took it out of the wrapping, the inside of the coat caught my eye. There, wasted, frankly, on the lining, was the unmistakable crisscross, horizontal and vertical bands in multiple colours which I had been yearning for. I'd struck tartan, says Sandra in Suffolk. I can only imagine that this was a beautiful... It's got a tartan lining. That's going to be pretty impeccable kind of suit. My father, once again proving he didn't understand the significance of anything, shoved the coat with its precious lining in a bag and placed it under the stairs until it was needed. Pearls before swine, I thought. It was June, after all. Yes, June. It would be months, hundreds of days before he could need it. Plenty of time to figure out an explanation, because I had resolved to have that lining. A few days later, it was Saturday. The house was empty, and I set to work. I'd like to tell you that I removed the lining like a surgeon, leaving no trace of my actions, but I can't, because actually I made a terrible mess of the whole extraction process. I may even have bitten it at one point. By the end, the coat was in tatters, and I had no option but to dispose of it. It was tucked at the bottom of a bin the night before the bin men came to minimise the chance of any discovery. This is not going very well, is it, for Sandra? The tartan was put on my jeans and jean jacket. If you take one thing away from this confession, take this. I looked amazing.
Oh, good.
I told my parents that Claudette had taken pity on me and given me some of her spare tartan. As soon as the words escaped my mouth, though, I froze, terrified this was an error. I waited for them to figure out no one could ever release spare tartan. There wasn't such a thing. It would be like giving away diamonds. And then I remembered to them tartan was just cloth. And they had bought my little white, or should that be tartan lie? I set out that evening for the local disco looking the bee's knees. I have to tell you, all my friends said I looked great. I was so proud. It only took a few weeks of looking and feeling like $1 million for me to forget all about how I would explain the fate of my dad's coat. As it happens, time marches on, the seasons change. Summer turned to autumn, which in turn... Sandra, you're overwriting this. Which in turn gave way to winter.
Oh, really?
There was talk of a new coat coming out, and I started to panic. What would I say when they found it gone? The clock was ticking and my brain was in overdrive trying to come up with an answer, and I was asked all about it. The day came soon enough. The entire house was pulled apart. The refrain of, "It must be here somewhere," rang out with ever-decreasing confidence. But I said nothing. More cupboards and drawers were emptied. I said nothing. Eventually, my father gave up and collapsed exhausted into his chair. My heart went out to him. I was about to explain all when my father remembered that my brother had taken something of a liking to the coat when it had been brought home originally, and he accused him of taking it. I remembered how good I looked, so I said nothing. My brother got the blame. My dad had to go back to work and explain that the coat was lost and had to pay for a new one. My brother was made to pay back the money from his part-time job, all the time protesting his innocence. I said nothing. At the time, I didn't give a shang-a-lang. But now, Father Simon, I would like to ask forgiveness for causing my family to turn the house upside down for no reason, for my dad having to tell his work that he'd lost the coat, and for letting my brother take the blame. Until now, when Sandra in Suffolk feels it's time. Wow, this is an old confession going back many decades to the times of the Bay City Rollers and an obsession with tartan. So let's see what Sister Rebecca makes of this.
I can understand the obsession, actually. My sister had a pair of tartan flares that she used to wear the whole time.
They would have been
They
the bee's
looked
knees.
terrible, and the taller she got, she carried on wearing them, and they got shorter and shorter. They really did look dreadful. But anyway,
I bet she thought she looked fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sure
That's the
she
whole
did.
thing.
I can't quite believe that Sandra threw away. First she bit the coat, and then she threw the whole thing away.
Well, she'd messed it all up
I
a
mean,
bit.
she could have just cut out a nice little neat patch, and maybe nobody would have noticed.
You would have thought.
She could have just asked her mum as well, just to buy her a bit of tartan from,
Well,
from
she
the
did, but
local
they said they couldn't-
haberdashery shop.
Said they couldn't
No?
afford it.
Okay. I think the last straw was really the brother getting the blame and her not saying anything. So I'm not going to forgive you.
How much would it cost just to have, like,
See, not much.
a square foot of tartan?
Really not much.
I'd have thought
No.
that wouldn't have cost very much.
Yeah.
So maybe Sandra's got it coming to her. Brother Matthew.
I'm definitely going to forgive here for two reasons.
Yes.
One, I'm afraid I come to a certain judgment when I see anyone with a coat with a bright lining. It's a bit like men who wear red trousers or anyone who wears trousers with sandals. I am not a big fan. So frankly, he had it coming because he had his bright lining on his jacket, and also blame the brother. Always a good idea to blame the brother. If you've got a brother, I would blame him. So I am going to.
Is that what you've done in
Yeah,
the
I'll
past?
go. Yes, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
the thing is, he didn't choose the coat. It was given to him by
Given to
the
him
work, so he
by-
didn't choose the
by
lining.
some company with pretensions above its station. Look at me with my brightly coloured line. Why don't you have the nerve to put it on the outside? You don't, and that's why you've got what's coming to you. You and your red trousers and your bohemian lifestyle. Oh, life doesn't apply to me. Apparently it does. Unlucky.
I had an arts teacher complain about you a couple of weeks ago. Genuinely. Nigel here, unbelievably, in already.
Yes,
Not
with-
just a last-minute arrival.
No, early and with ingredients.
And they smell.
A bag full of British garlic.
Yeah, wild garlic.
Wild garlic. I don't think I've ever seen that before, but thank you very much indeed. It's all coming up. Dear Monsignor Mayo and the thankfully forgiving few, until the other week, says Todd in Manchester. Thank you, Todd. Until the other week, I did not think I had anything to confess. Well, nothing that was suitable for broadcast. Having now heard how some parents have been economical with the truth with their offspring, it has made me realise I should seek purgation regarding an incident with my two children from about 17 years ago. One Saturday morning, I was reading the paper whilst the electronic babysitter entertained the children. It was Power Rangers or some other similarly bonkers cartoon which featured a dragon. At the end of it, my son, Bertie, who was about 5 or 6, started playing at being a dragon and saying how cool it was and how cool it would be maybe to have one. I said, I don't know what all the fuss is about. Dragons, we've got one in the cellar. Really? Yeah, it heats the house and all the hot water. Where do you think that comes from? Well, my son stopped and looked at me in the most disbelieving way possible. Well, come on then, I'll show you, I said. I led him down to the cellar. It lives in that big white cage, I said, pointing at the central heating boiler. It's not big enough, said Bertie, immediately complaining. I assured him that dragons come in all shapes and sizes, and that I hadn't said it was going to be a big one. Anyway, they liked being in small spaces as it was easier to keep warm. Be sensible, we couldn't have a big one flying around the house, could we? How dangerous would that be? I told him. I started to revel, says Todd, in my mendacity. If you look through that little window, the inspection's not obviously, if you look through that little window, I will make him breathe fire. I told the two of the men I stood my daughter on a box so that she could see. Now, at this point, you have to know that this was a demand boiler. We don't have a hot water tank. The boiler just heats the water as needed. So whilst the kids were looking through the inspection window, I turned on the tap over the sink, saying, "Come on, Idris." This was pre The Wire, so I took inspiration from Ivor the Engine's dragon. "Let's have some flames now, Idris, please." And sure enough, turn on the tap. The boiler fires up and the flames appeared. After a few seconds, I turned the tap off, crying as I did so, "Enough now, Idris, fire's out!" And the flames died to my command. It's a pretty cool dad who has control of a fire-breathing dragon. Anyway, on Monday, Bertie could not wait to get into school. However, over meals over the next few nights, it quickly became clear that not all of Bertie's friends believed him, including his best friend Tom, who by chance was coming round to play the following Saturday. Tom and his sister Sarah were hardly through the door before I was asked to show them the family dragon in his big white cage in the cellar. So the whole masquerade was repeated and all doubts settled. Bertie had at least one more ally in the playground on Monday, saying our house was indeed heated by dragon's fire. Charitable Collective, I need to ask forgiveness from our children, not from our children.
Maybe.
No.
Also not from Tom and Sarah. They've grown up unharmed in any way and now relate this information to smaller nephews and nieces. I do need to ask forgiveness from Anya, our Turkish au pair, who at the time really did not need long discussions about dragons whilst trying to learn our confusing and illogical language. But anyway, it wasn't St. George Turkish in the first place. She should know all about fire-breathing dragons. An interesting point. Also forgiveness from Mrs. H, the primary school teacher, who had better things to do with her valuable time than sort out petty squabbles over imaginary fire-breathing beasts. Also from the parents, who had been fielding questions about dragons heating homes for weeks on end without having the foggiest idea what their children were talking about. And finally, and most sincerely, from the gas engineer, who I think I terrified and confused when I had to chase him from our house, shouting, "You can't have our Idris!" because I thought that would be preferable to coming clean and losing face in front of my children. Absolution absolutely required, please. A lie that went too far, Todd in Manchester. It was good fun, but if you start chasing the hard-working gas engineers off your property just to keep the gag going, I think we know it's all gone too far. What do you say there, Sister
I think
Rebecca?
Todd sounds slightly bonkers himself. I mean,
Let's not insult the listener.
that really is going a long way, chasing the gas engineer
Check the address
out the door.
of that mail.
I think, I can't quite believe, I know Bertie was only 5. I can't quite believe he believed that.
He fell for it?
That he fell for it.
What a fantastic idea.
Yeah. I do feel for the teachers having to play along with all these parents' white lies to
Who
their
make
children.
stuff up.
Yeah, I mean...
My dad punched a
know
shark.
I know that Matt thinks completely opposite, but I can't go along with it because, you know, you might be scarring them for life. And you might be making them never trust an adult again. So, even though it was a bit of fun, Todd, I'm not going to forgive you.
Let's try novice Nigel, who's worked his way in here.
Yeah, well, I just think, there's elements of Steve Martin here, aren't there, where he's just gone on, and Idris and gas engineers. I did like the use of the word of mendacity and purgation, so he's not completely bonkers. Well, only one part of his brain is Todd. But I think he probably did get out of hand, but by the end of it, lots of parents were in on it, and so were many teachers. So, Todd, why not? Let's forgive you. It sounds like a lot of fun and you need help.
I think it's quite clever to actually link from Power Rangers to the boiler in the cellar. It would never have occurred to me to say, yes, we have one. Here it is. Let me show you. Anyway, Brother Matthew.
I love this. I wish I'd thought of this one. This sounds excellent. However, how long do you keep it going? Does this mean that every time they turned on the taps, he had to keep shouting, "Idris!
Come on, Idris,
more
let's see
fire, Idris! We're having a bath and a shower and doing the dishes." So I think I would have tired of it after, say, a couple of days. So to keep going for as long as they did with the gas engineer being brought in as well, I don't think I would have done that. So I'm not going to forgive this time.
Okay.
Normally, though, I'm fully in favour of lying to your kids.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Very good, I thought, this week. 2 questions for you. Who did you forgive? And secondly, we know you have one of your own, so it's high time you sent us your story. So why haven't you? confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week, and the Weekly Mayo available to download now and every Friday. Thank you.